It's doing it.
Are we live?
I believe we're good to go.
All right. Well, welcome, OWEB Grant Committee members and anybody joining on YouTube this morning. For the record, my name is Dan Brown and I co-chair this grants committee with Barbara Boya. Barbara is unable to join us today, so you're stuck with me throughout the whole meeting today. Want to remind everybody that it's a virtual meeting being streamed on the OWEB YouTube channel and also recorded if folks want to look at it afterwards. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, you can find meeting materials on the OWEB website. You just scroll down to the board and committee section of the website, and you'll find the materials there towards the bottom of the page. And you can click on the grants committee and have access to the agenda and other materials for this meeting, as well as past meeting recordings. I'm gonna just call on folks to introduce themselves. And Nicole, if I miss somebody, maybe you can help. I'll start with board members and then go to OWEB staff. So let's see. I got a bunch of beautiful looking faces on my screen. Liz, how about you?
Liz Agpawa, board member voting and representing the Oregon Board of Forestry for OWEB.
Great. And Russ, how about we jump over to you?
Sure. Russ Hoflick, member at large of the OWEB board.
And Lindsay?
Good morning, everybody. Lindsay McClary, public voting member at large. I live in West Salem and I work for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde.
All right. Chris?
Good morning, everybody. Chris Allen, non-voting board member representing the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
And Mark?
Good morning, everybody. Mark Labhart, Fish and Wildlife Commission voting member, and I'm zooming in from Sisters this morning.
Beautiful. And I do not see any other board members, so how about Sarah?
Morning, everybody. Sarah O'Brien, OWEB's executive director. I'm up in Estacada, and it's chilly up here, but probably not as cold as Sisters.
Stephanie?
Morning, everybody. Stephanie Page, Deputy Director.
Mr. Williams?
Good morning, everybody. Eric Williams, OWEB's Restoration Grants Manager.
Mr. Hartstein?
Good morning, everyone. Eric Hartstein, Policy Coordinator.
And then how about Jillian?
Good morning, everyone. Jillian McCarthy, Partnership Coordinator with OWEB.
And Audrey?
Good morning. I am Audrey Hatch, the Conservation Outcomes Coordinator with OWEB staff.
And Liz?
Good morning, Liz Redon. I am the Regional Program Representative covering the Willamette region.
And oh boy, the pitches just moved around. I think I was planning on going to Ken next.
Hey everybody, good morning. My name is Ken Fetcho and I am OWEB's Effectiveness Monitoring Coordinator and Tribal Liaison.
And I think that was, oh, Denise.
Good morning, everyone. Denise Hoffert, Partnerships Coordinator, and I'm coming to you live from Albany.
Great. Is that everybody from OWEB and board?
Looks like
yes. Oh no, Nicole.
I'm just linking here in the background. Don't worry about me. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Bettinardi. I'm OWEB Staff Board Liaison.
Gotcha. Okay. And I see Alex Etheridge joined us.
Hi, I'm Alex Etheridge. I don't think I've met most of you. I'm USGS Associate Director for Studies in the Oregon Water Science Center. I'm relatively new in the center. I'm just here to learn about this meeting.
Perfect. Yeah. Do you have any public comment today, Alex?
No.
Okay. Thank you. That's kind of my main question for you. So we're going to run through the agenda, which includes public comment, and then we're going to talk about the open solicitation cycle timing, the FIP ecological priorities, and FIP progress tracking reports, and a rule update. I hope I'm looking at the right notes here. And then we'll go through other business. Does anybody have questions or comments about the agenda? Corrections to something I might have just said that was incorrect. Okay, so for public comments, it looks like we do not have anybody live, and I assume folks received the one written public comment that came in from David Cruz, had to do with restoration work. And thank you, David, for that comment. Love to see the interest in mussels and beavers out there. And nobody online, so that concludes public comment. All right. So we're gonna roll into agenda item 3, which is the open solicitation cycle timing. And I can stop talking and hand this over to Liz, I believe. Is that right, Liz?
Yes, and I'm pulling up slides right now.
Excelente. Thank you.
All right.
And we see the slides and they're beautiful.
Well, I can't take credit. That's of course Linda does that for us. She makes us look good. All right, so I am going to kick us off talking about the cycle timing for open solicitation. And you likely probably remember hearing references to this in recent board meetings. And this conversation actually began before COVID, and then it was put on hold because we had to deal with a different set of problems. But now that we're somewhat back to normal, we're finding that some of the challenges we experienced before COVID with the cycle timing still occurs today. So that's why we are bringing it back. OWEB relies on volunteers from tribes, state and federal agencies, and universities with a diverse expertise to review our applications. A strength of the review process is that these volunteers provide local knowledge about the watersheds, the complex watersheds in each region of our state. And we need participation to be safe. And we also need participation to include that expertise needed to review the diverse set of projects that come in. We have found that the current cycle timing can be a barrier to this. We have experienced unsafe conditions in the winter and reduced participation. For example, during the summer, some reviewers have to respond to fires and are unable to participate in our review process. When considering the seasonal constraints, such as those listed on this slide, we have found that it's clear that events requiring travel, like our site visits and our review team meetings, we really should be avoiding the months of December to February and then June through August in order to have a safe cycle and review process for reviewers and for applicants. So I know there's a lot going on the slide, so we'll take some time to orient a bit on it. But first, when considering the timing, there are some constraints that we have to consider. It takes 6 months, at least 6 months, to complete a review cycle. And if we want to have the site visits and also to have to be able to write the evaluative feedback that we provide applicants at the end of the process. It also has to end with a board meeting in order for the board to be able to make those awards. So that really limits our ability to consider different options for the cycle timing. Looking at that top graph, so that first graph is our current state for the October and April due dates. Excuse me. The application's open for 3 months, starting the end of July for the October due date and the end of January for the April due date. Site visits occur generally in December and January, and then also June and July. Then our review meetings are primarily in January and July. And as you can see, this is where we have that significant overlap with the winter weather and then also the fire season. Moving to the bottom graph, this is our future cycle timing with a February and August due date. And the applications will be open for 4 months. And I'll explain a little bit later the difference in the timing and why we're not going to do 3 months. But in this new cycle timing, we would have them open for 4 months, starting at the end of March for an August due date and the end of September for a February due date. Site visits would then occur mostly in April and May, and then also in October and November. Then their review meetings would occur primarily in May and November. Shifting the timing does not completely eliminate the overlap, and you can see that in these graphs, but at least takes us out of those peak seasons of the winter weather and then also the fire season. So as part of this process of considering the shifting and the cycle timing, we did reach out to reviewers and applicants in a variety of ways for feedback to better understand what we need to pay attention to with this change in the cycle timing. And so we did start out with a survey. And we asked the applicants and reviewers a similar set of questions to check the pulse on the extent to which shifting that application cycle timing may affect their ability to participate in applying for grants, attending site visits, attending review team meetings, and then also receiving funds. And this is a summary of those responses. And we did receive 86 responses from applicants and 52 from the reviewers. So I'm just going to work around this table a little bit. So what we noticed is that most of the responses did occur in this neutral zone of our scale here, from negatively impacting to positively impacting, with a little bit of a bump over here from reviewers indicating that the change would positively impact their ability to participate in the site visits. And then looking on either side of that neutral zone, what we found is the next set of percentages or highest responses were in the somewhat negative impact, somewhat positive impact. Again, with a little bit of a bump over here from reviewers indicating a positive impact to their ability to participate in the review team. And then the lowest responses did occur on either side of our scale, the negatively impacting to positively impacting. And I do want to spend a little time over here because there are quite a few responses from applicants indicating a negative impact. And these numbers really reflect that there is an impact to primarily the practitioners implementing in-stream projects during the summer work period. This new cycle timing will feel different because the current timing has mostly remained the same since the beginning of OWEB. And it was specifically designed to avoid the summer in-water work period because the primary restoration activity that OWEB was investing in historically was those end-of-stream projects. So we specifically arranged around that timing. And so it does feel different that we might overlap with that now. We also were able to collect, sorry, my slide moved. We also were able to collect comments in the survey from both applicants and reviewers to get more information about what those impacts might be. And so we did see a set of challenges that came out of those comments. We did some learning to better understand those challenges. And then we also created some adaptive strategies to address some of those challenges, or hope to address those challenges. So circling back to the challenges, what we saw most in the comments is that restoration timelines are challenging. In particular, those summer in-water work periods overlapping with an August due date will be challenging. We also heard back, we originally had proposed a January due date. And what we heard is that that would be really hard for folks coming out of the holiday season to be able to work with the partners and with landowners, be able to pull together applications and submit those in January. And then finally, what we heard was that the hunting season in the fall could be challenging to schedule around, that we need to pay attention to that. So moving over to learning, we did spend some time to better understand this set of challenges. And after assessing in-water work periods and inventorying restoration actions that occur in each of the seasons, what we learned is restoration occurs all year round. The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife guidance on in-water work periods indicates that there is always an in-water work period somewhere in the state and every month. And there's also a peak season from July to October that occurs. So that aligns with the responses we saw in the survey. Also, over 25 years of investment, the types of restoration activities have diversified. We have seen more upland projects, more water quality projects, and the timing of those projects are different. And what we've seen is there's actually more activity occurring in the fall and spring now, which overlaps with our current application timing compared to the past. So it has changed quite a bit. So when looking across the restoration activities and timing, there is no longer a slow period, which is great for habitat, a little bit challenging when trying to find the ideal application time period. We also heard that shifting the timing is likely to improve site visit conditions. So especially for those winter site visits, snow, high water flow tends to be really challenging, ice also challenging to access those sites. And so often those get converted to virtual formats, which is not ideal. It's not the preferred because it really takes away from the learning experience. It's not the same as getting out in the field and really seeing the projects on the landscape. And then finally, just looking more into considering the impact of hunting season, looking at the calendar, there is always a holiday or a peak travel occurring, whether it's the holiday season, spring break, summer travel. No matter what, in any season, what we find is we have to work around something. And so that particular issue is a little bit of a zero-sum game. We don't benefit anymore. We don't have any more challenges than we do now. So shifting over to our adaptive strategies, we originally, again, had a January and July due date. And so when we saw the feedback about having a due date right after the holidays being challenging, we shifted that to a February and August due date. And so with February, it moves them a little further out so that they have time to work with those landowners and partners to put those applications together and then submit them further out after the holiday. And then also circling back to the longer application window. So if you remember in that earlier slide, I had said that we were doing 4 months instead of 3 months. That's in response to the restoration timeline. So that's right now, what would happen is that we would have it open in March and be due in August, and then open in September and be due in February. And what that does is it opens the application in a similar window that occurs now. So for folks where the current timing works really well for them to get in the application, they can still get in it in the same time period, enter the information, and then submit it when they are ready to submit those applications. So after the survey work, excuse me, we did do a focus group, which included both reviewers and applicants. And we presented a similar set of slides to the focus group. And we asked the participants, did OWEB miss anything in understanding the issues with shifting the cycle timing? Is there something else we need to pay attention to in terms of impacts? We heard a similar portion of comments related to the impacts to people implementing those in-stream projects, including, again, that summer application due date overlapping with in-water work period, and also the timing of awards could delay implementation schedules. So we're hoping, again, that the longer windows, application windows, will help with the overlap with the due date so folks can get in the application early and submit that information. And then also with the award timeline, we're actually expecting that implementation schedules are likely to be extended regardless of the application timing because of OWEB's new role in implementing the National Historic Preservation Act. We will likely need to shift our expectations on restoration timelines in order to complete those processes and do them well. We also heard from the participants they liked the longer application window, so there are comments on that. They also are hoping OWEB will keep an option open to return to the schedule if we find that after a while it's not working out. Can we go back to the original schedule? Some of the more repeated comments we heard is that applicants and reviewers value site visits. This is a unique element of the OWEB review process. Not very many grantors provide opportunity for reviewers and applicants to come together and learn about the projects beyond just the paper application. It provides context to better understand projects. We're different kind of learners. Some people can learn fully from a written application. Some are visual learners like myself, and going out in the field gives you a better understanding of the project and the landscape that the project sits in. It also provides an opportunity for the applicants and the reviewers to come together and have conversations and learn together about what's working and not working in restoration. We also heard that applicants and reviewers value participation across the diverse expertise. When we explained that there's likely, with the reduced participation, it likely affects the review, that even though it's hard to measure, we can't tell how it affects the review. Less people having a conversation, most likely it looks different than it would have. And when applicants thought about that, they did say that we value the diverse expertise. That's important a part of the process. And so having that participation is important to them. And then I think my favorite comment is that it's a symbiotic relationship, but we rely on each other for the granting process to be successful. So I think there was recognition that while there are some drawbacks to the new timing, that both safety and having diverse expertise is still more important so that we have a review process that's consistent and safe. So there is a transition period as we move to this new cycle timing that will occur, and this is what it looks like across 3 biennia, so including the one we're in. So for the current one, we did have 4 applications of 4 awards. As we move into the 25-27 biennium, we need to have a 9-month gap in order to transition to the next cycle timing. So what that means is there are only 3 application awards planned for the 25-27 biennium. And then when we get to 27-29 biennium, we're back to 4 applications and 4 awards. And I just want to note the boxes with the dark blue line, that's indicating the monitoring cycle. So just remember that monitoring is offered once a year, and our expectation is that those would be submitted during the summer application window. And so in terms of next steps, this, as you can see from this, it will start in 25. So we are going to move into the 9-month gap. And instead of accepting applications in April, we would accept them in August. And then that would set us on the trajectory for moving through that 25-27 timeline to adjust the cycle timing. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or see if Eric Williams has anything you want to add.
No, thanks, Liz. You covered it well. Thank you.
Questions from folks? Lindsay?
Yeah, thanks for that great presentation. Really happy with OWEB staff that it just speaks to the volume of the quality of work that staff produces, like recognizing that there might need to be a shift, asking the folks, getting folks together, and then responding. So great job. Really excited to see that. My question would be when we take the 9-month gap, starting in the 25-27 biennium, is that when we would shift into the applications being open for 4 months at that time?
Yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I don't see my raise hand button for some reason. So this was on the agenda as a discussion item. And so is there any action to go along with this after we finish our discussion? Is it going to be a recommendation to the OWEB board, or what's the deliverable from this? Or have we already made the decision?
Thanks for that question, Mark. And we expected you might have that question. The board does not set our application cycles, and so it's not a board decision. However, we didn't want to just make the change without engagement with the board, and so like with any grants committee meeting, a report on this discussion would go into the board book for the January board meeting. So that the full board is informed of the background behind this change, and so that board members wouldn't be caught unaware after making the change. And so that was the purpose of our coming to the grants committee today.
Okay, thank you. And then I would just add that with what Lindsay said, a great presentation. You've really covered all the bases here. And with human nature, you're always going to find some pros and cons to anything when you propose a change. And so it looks to me like, from what I've seen, is you've done your homework. And while it's not perfect, it's good to give it a try and see what happens. We've listened to everybody. We've tried to modify things as appropriately, and I think we're on the right track here. So that's my comments.
Liz?
Yeah, I echo what Mark has said. Wonderful presentation. Great for all our different kinds of ways of learning. Thank you for the visuals on that. Did you get any feedback, since one of the big changes for 2025 to 2027 is the reduction in the number of cycles? Did anyone have concerns about that you were aware of?
Yeah, we did get great question. We did got a couple of comments around that. So key question is, would we still have the same amount of money in the spending plan? And the answer is yes. It just would be divided over 3 cycles instead of 4 cycles. And so that seemed to land well with folks. The only suggestion that we got related to that is, because of the 9-month gap, would OWEB consider maybe spending a little bit more with that first cycle to catch up a little bit, and then maybe the later cycles might spend a little bit less. So that was the one feedback we got, is we are kind of we have that long stretch, maybe spend a little more on the front end to make up for it.
And I thank you for that. And I really always like how y'all are thinking ahead a couple different steps, and the thought that if for some reason this does not work, although it looks really well planned, that you're allowing yourself to go back to the original. So yeah, very adaptive. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. Russ?
I just want to add to the positive comments made for the record, that I think this is a very thorough assessment of your options, a thoughtful embrace of the diversity of needs that are out there, and we're fortunate to have your detailed work on this this assessment. So I'm fully behind it. Thank you.
Anybody else? So, Liz, I'm not going to ask you to bring back up your chart, but I was trying to figure out where that 9-month gap was. Is that so instead of, there was a April 25 in the current biennium, and then there was an August 25 in the upcoming biennium. So are we not doing the April 25 and it's just shifting to the August? Is that correct?
Correct. So instead, we're actually in the 9-month gap. So instead of opening the application at the end of January, like we would in our previous state, we're waiting until April to be able to open that next application, and it would be due in August.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. And then if this is a long answer, then no need to go into it, but could you remind us just quickly why OWEB now has a bigger role with the historic conservation? Was that something that the NOAA money kind of handed off to you? Am I remembering that correctly?
It's part of our responsibility for the PACSRF money, the Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery Fund.
That's kind of what I thought. And how's that going, generally speaking?
Oh, I'm not the right person to ask that. Courtney is actually leading that.
Okay.
And there's been considerable outreach completed both internally and externally. I think I'm going to look at managers. We're still waiting for agreement, right, on NOAA, so it hasn't started yet. Yes.
Yeah, we don't have a signature.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Eric.
No, go ahead, Sarah. You take it.
Well, Steph probably knows more than I do too, so we can pass the ball around as needed. But my understanding is we're looking for a programmatic agreement signature pretty quick in the new year, and we've been speaking with the governor's office and others around that. I do want to note too, there's been significant outreach with tribal government partners around that, and just reassure folks that that's taken place. And that Ken can tell us more about if there are questions.
Great. Ken, did I miss you with the intros earlier?
No, you got me.
Okay.
Thank
Sorry.
you. No worries.
All right. Next agenda item then is FIP ecological priorities. And Jillian and Mr. Hartstein are going to walk us through that.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'll kick things off before passing the baton over to Jillian. So the FIP program rules state that at least every 5 years, the boards will review the ecological priorities for the program. And the last time the board reviewed the priorities was in 2020. And given that the program and the ecological priorities at that time were still relatively new, there was a fairly light touch given to the review and the adoption of the ecological priorities by the board. So given that the program is now approaching 10 years old, and I know there's a lot of interest in the ecological priorities. We're planning on having a more involved process this time around for updating those priorities. So we have a draft timeline for this process that we'd like to walk through with the committee. So I will share my screen. And can everybody see that okay?
Yes, sir.
Great. So we're here in December 2024. Review and if there's any refinements for this timeline and key milestones with the grants committee. You'll notice in the timeline that we have noted opportunities for public comments kind of throughout this whole process, and there will be many. So in January, we'll have the timeline as an attachment to the grants committee report, as well as a list of targeted engagement audiences to the OWEB board. And we'll get into that engagement here in a second. But we're thinking with the engagement audiences that we have sort of our traditional partners, watershed councils, tribes, soil and water conservation districts, land trusts, other nonprofits. And of course, we've had a pretty extensive outreach to non-traditional partners over the last couple of years through OWEB leadership. So we could be sure to contact them to let them know that we're doing the ecological priority revision, as well as we've had listening sessions for things like the Natural and Working Lands Fund that have been focused on a little bit more non-traditional partners. So we can reach out to those folks as well. So also in January, there will be a agenda item related to committee structure. So if there is a FIP committee that comes out of that, great. If not, we would recommend at least a FIP ecological priorities ad hoc or a subcommittee to help kind of guide and shepherd this process over the next year. Because it'll be probably pretty intensive. So in the late winter, moving into spring, we have staff developing a survey, as well as convening listening sessions to hear public and tribal input on the existing FIP ecological priorities, as well as opportunities for revisions to those priorities. And we'll also be engaging with state and federal agency partners. We've already kind of kicked that process off a little bit with ODFW a few months ago, and we expect there'll be a lot of opportunities for further engagement there. So in June, we would discuss the results of the survey, what we heard in the listening sessions and engagement efforts with tribes and agencies, with the committee, and then start to develop a conceptual ecological priority draft. In July, we would share that conceptual draft with the board for input. And then moving into August, based on what we heard from the board input, we would refine ecological priorities and then bring that back to the committee in September for further review and revisions. And at that time, we'd also start to consider if there are new priorities, developing a theory of change for any of those new or even revised priorities. In October, we'll be bringing it back to the board for really the kind of that final review and for revisions. November, staff would be incorporating those revisions into the final draft ecological priorities, which the committee would then review in December and then provide a recommendation to the OWEB board. And then in January of 26, so basically a full year from now, the board would be considering those recommendations that would be brought forward from the committee and approving final ecological priorities for the FIP program. So I will stop sharing and see if there are any questions or if there's anything that other FIP staff would like to add.
Questions? Go ahead, Ross.
So thank you for mentioning the breadth of the outreach. The timing is, I think, paralleling the solid work that is being done by ODFW on the update of the conservation strategy. And I believe that it would be in our best interest to take their lead and as they develop those priorities. I've been most impressed by the work of ODFW to coordinate with our federal partners to get their input. So the breadth of that document, I think, can give us, in of itself, very, very good guidance as we move forward. I'm also pleased by the degree of outreach to other state agencies. I saw in the information I was reviewing, Mark Lappart gave me some good contacts at ODFW to help me better understand where they are. But the Oregon Climate Action Commission is, again, for the first time, we have an opportunity to take the governor's lead and incorporate the latest findings, I think, into our FIP process by incorporating guidance and recommendations from that agency as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing the balance between the scientific information, conservation information that's out there on the federal level with the guiding work that is being done by ODFW.
Thanks, Russ.
Yeah, thank you, Russ. Anybody else? Eric, I have, oh, go ahead, Stephanie.
Oh, thanks, Dan. And you might be asking the same thing that I was going to ask, but I think one thing we've been really clear on is that it would be difficult to impossible from a workload perspective for us to do this engagement process on priorities while also trying to run a new FIP cycle. And so I'm just going to ask either of the Erics to talk about the next application cycle and the timing of that and how that would fit in with this priorities process.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. Jillian actually has a really good spreadsheet that she's developed that outlines the timeline quite well. So she'll get into
we
that here.
anticipated you might all have that question. And so so if there aren't any other questions specific to the ecological priorities timeline, I can pull up the broader FIP cohort cycle timing that we also wanted to walk through with you all today. So I'm going to share screen as well, and you're going to get a peek behind the curtain here of what things look like before we send them to Linda for polishing. So
behind every beautiful Linda presentation, there's a series of spreadsheets.
Yes.
And it is kind of, as I've discovered, the love language of OWEB staff is color-coded spreadsheets, and then they get beautiful at both places. So
no, it's bubble
beautiful
diagrams.
in a different way.
It's bubble diagrams.
Yes. So if colorful spreadsheets are OWEB's love language, then there's a lot of love on this one. So I will. Can folks see that? Okay. All right. So first I want to orient everyone to the timeline because there's a lot going on and a lot of colors here. So we can see the time scale at the top few rows. We have the biennium divided into years and then divided into quarters that you can see. And so the second set, the next group here is walking through that solicitation and award process for each cohort of FIPS. And so this is the big initiative level application cycle that we're talking about. So for example, you can see with cohort 1, our first time we did this, we had the solicitation that was back in May of 15. The application deadline was in November. The review happened between November and January. There was grants committee recommendation in January, and then the cohort was selected and awarded in January by the full board at their board meeting. And so scrolling across, you can see those same details for cohorts 2 and 3 and 4 if we work all the way across. Before I do that though, the next set of rows below here identifies the active period of each FIP. And so the active period is when the FIPs are holding their regular technical review team meetings, when we are obligating funds into grant agreements, when folks are implementing their projects. And so this is over those 3 biennia. So each cohort also identifies along the timeline, cohort 1 biennium 1, cohort 1 biennium 2, biennium 3. We're not going to pay attention to this delayed bit here. And then the next thing that each cohort has is this average of about 4 years post-active period where they are still implementing projects that were obligated into grant agreements in that, well, any point in time in that 6-year active period, but most likely in their 3rd biennium. So we have awarded, if we scroll over here, you can see we've awarded four cohorts of FIPS. What you can also see on this timeline is the duration of time that's been between the solicitations for cohorts and also between the awards for cohorts. And they've ranged anywhere from just under 2 years to about 3.5 years between them. And so this range has been, when we have solicited for FIPS, has been a little unpredictable over the years. The other thing you'll see is that the cohorts were awarded sometimes at the beginning of the biennium and sometimes mid-biennium. And so this has caused some confusion and challenges for our FIP partners and also some challenges for OWEB staff as we've been managing these over the years. And so moving forward, if we get to the other colorful pieces here, beyond cohort 4, what we're proposing is a transition that would allow us to move to 1 cycle per biennium for new FIP initiatives that would be awarded at the beginning of each biennium. And so this means that the solicitation for cohort 5 would be in January of 2026. And this transition gives or results in a couple of important things, both for the program and for this conversation with the committee and with the board. So first off, for the program, making this transition would give us what we are calling an on-ramp period for the FIPS. So during the time between the board's selection of the FIPS and the board award of the FIPS, there would be the 6-month period where OWEB staff and the partnership would have time to recruit for the TRT members. They would have time to identify the outputs and indicators that they want to report on through their progress tracking reports through the life of the FIP, and then generally get their systems and processes established before the first grant cycle kicks off so they can hit the ground running when the funds become available. And then the other important piece to soliciting cohort 5 in January of 26 is that it will give the board, what I didn't show you all down here, is this ecological priorities review timeline in our rules revisions. So it would give the board adequate time to conduct that ecological priorities review process that Eric just walked us through, and also give staff the time to integrate the results of that ecological review and the FIP rule revisions into the solicitation and program materials for cohort 5. So that was a lot of information and a lot of scrolling through here. So I will stop sharing and just see if there's questions on this or questions back to the priorities conversation.
So Stephanie, that kind of was my question, but I was going to ask it in a slightly different way, which I think this timeline answers. And it had more to do with, and I don't know if there's like, maybe this is a question for Mr. Hartstein, but the ground rules for the ecological priorities. What I had going on in my mind is if we lose an ecological priority that somebody is already working on submitting a FIP for, that would seem to be a big problem. But with this, I think what I'm seeing is the new ecological priorities would be sorted out before we're actually soliciting a new FIP. So that would eliminate that problem if there was like a ground rule that said we can only have X number of ecological priorities, and therefore to bring a new one on, we got to throw one out. So it's kind of a two questions, but thank you for the timeline seems to sort of address what I had going on in my pea brain. I got to let them respond, Lindsay, and then go to you.
Yeah, I'd say you're right, Dan. That's part of the reason why we have the timeline structured as we're proposing with the next solicitation, is to work through the ecological priority piece ahead of doing the next solicitation, because we thought it'd be really confusing for folks in addition to a pretty substantial workload.
Can I jump in just real quick too to Dan's question? I think it's something to still watch, and I believe there's you guys have done some informal outreach to partners too, just to kind of do a landscape scan, right? Because in traveling around, I do hear from folks, oh, we've got this project going on and we think it's almost FIP ready. And it's a big process. And so folks are looking well in advance. And I know even just down visiting the Klamath earlier this year, folks were, starting to build ideas in their mind for the next cycle around the existing set of priorities. So we flagged that, but I think it's an important discussion to keep having with partners and make sure folks are aware this change is coming.
Yeah. And one more thing, Dan, in response to your question about ground rules around priorities. If the board wanted to add a new priority, they don't have to throw one out in order to add a new one. There's no set of like, there can only be 7 or there has to be a set number of them. That's part of the conversation that the board will have.
Yeah, but with a word of caution on that, at some point in time, if you just keep adding priorities, then they become less priorities and less meaningful. So maybe there's like, to address Sarah's thing, maybe there's some sort of a transition, like, we're shifting these priorities, which means right now we're still thinking they're all priorities, but at some point in the future, we're still kind of honing in on the most critical priority. Lindsay?
Yeah, thank you for that. I had 2 comments, but this last conversation just sparked another one. So when we get to that timeline and the board starts talking about priorities, I think it'd be really good to hear from FIP staff if 7 priorities has been manageable, or if there would be room for another, or if 5 seems to be the balance. Just maybe it's, kind of far enough along in the bienniums that there's a rhythm, and would like to kind of hear that from staff. 2, same on Dan Brown's and Sarah's comments. I'm also hearing conversations about folks getting ready for FIPS, and I know that there has been some level of outreach. I don't doubt OWEB's outreach efforts at all, but I'm wondering if we can communicate that in a I know there's emails that go out on the listserv, so forgive me if I've missed that, but also like on the website, just like hey, these are up for review, just to give people some, I don't know, additional reminder, because I do know some folks that are getting aligned to submit an application. And then the third comment is I really love seeing the spreadsheet. So thank you for that. And I liked that it kind of feels like we're dialing it in between going forward. It will be like 2 years between solicitations, and I really liked the kind of consistency there.
To address, I'll take Lindsay's questions in order, I think. The first one on, has 7 priorities been manageable? And my response to that is that really the review process and the spending plan that the board adopts takes care of that. Because your spending plan essentially places a limit on how many funds can be awarded in a given biennium. And it's been relatively stable over the course of the history of the program. And so I would expect that would continue. So the review process basically ends up with a recommendation to the board ranking all the applications that come in. So even if there were 15 priorities, the top several are the ones that are going to be under discussion for funding. So it doesn't put additional pressure on staff because it's the same number of FIPS that we'd be funding in a given biennium. And then in terms of the folks that are getting ready for FIPS, yes, I think we can definitely communicate that throughout the priorities process, through the listserv and the website. And we have heard from several groups that are actively considering either a new FIP application or a FIP 2.0 for FIPs that were funded in the past. And it's interesting because I think the most common response that we've gotten is relief, because this new schedule gives them about 8 more months to get their application together. And yes, there's some uncertainty about how the priorities will shake out, but I think the folks that are working on these, I don't know that people are anticipating drastic change to the priorities, but we have to go through the process and see where that ends up. And let's see, I think I got the responses. Lindsay, let us know. Okay, thank you.
I wanted to make one related comment, but I'm looking at the time and I know that Audrey has something for us. So Audrey, how much time do you need to run through? Because we're short here.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I would say 10 minutes would be sufficient, and longer if there are questions. That's my thought.
And we've got 38 minutes remaining, Dan, in our allotted time.
Okay. Oh, for some reason I thought it was an hour. Sorry, people. Then I'm gonna ask my question.
You guys almost just got 30 minutes back, but you didn't.
I know, yeah, I did. Thank you. Because I'm a non-voting board member, so I don't have to struggle as much as the voting board members for some of this stuff. But as somebody that's participated in a couple of these sort of FIP decision-making processes, I kind of struggle with these ecological priorities in the sense that, and I know it's worked out over time, just ironically, but what I'm getting to, Eric Williams, you probably know what I'm going to say. It's this sort of representation. Like, if we're identifying these ecological priorities, right, then I would expect we would want somebody working on these priorities. And so if we identify priorities that nobody's working on, and we have an application that comes in to work on one of those priorities, but it's not ranked very good, it's something that I see as a struggle point. It's like, well, maybe it's not the best sort of team in the world, or there's some problem that resulted in that FIP being ranked lower. But if it's the only one we have that's focused on a priority that this board and OWEB have identified, then it's kind of just this struggle question, like, shouldn't we be investing in all of our ecological priorities? There's no answer to that necessarily, but it's something that I think the board should think about in terms of how we do make decisions on these FIPs. And I know, like, when I brought it up before, it's like, well, we actually have pretty good representation, like, just by luck. Anyways.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, maybe it's luck, but I think it's a little more than that. I think that the challenge, though, is we just simply have to balance the, what we would like to invest in with what the capacity and capability and interest is on the ground. I mean, we're depending on voluntary restoration implementation. And partnerships in the FIP program to do this, collections of organizations that are working towards the same larger landscape goals. And we can't make that happen on the ground. But where it exists, our program can, set those priorities and invite people in. And I think that one of the reasons that we now have FIPS in all of the board designated priorities is because I think the board was in tune with what the priorities were for people on the ground and what the priorities were from people doing the science on habitat restoration. And over time, we got there. And I think that was even expressed specifically by the board back then, almost 10 years ago, that their desire was we would have people working in all 7, and now here we are, and we do. But we can't force it as much as we might want to in certain places. It has to happen organically, which is how all of our programs work. And I think personally, I'm pretty happy with how we got there to having FIPS operating in all 7 priorities. It's been really rewarding to see that.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, it's not OWEB's priorities, it's the state of Oregon's priorities, and that includes all of our partners. So they're already focused on these priorities. So thanks for putting me in check on that one.
And I think Denise has something to add as well.
Yeah, I see your hand up here. Yeah, go ahead, Denise.
Yeah, thanks. I also just want to add, Dan, that we also have folks, working throughout the state in our open solicitation grant program and other grant offerings that OWEB has that are working in strategic ways. Some of the presentations at the last board meeting that the RPRs provided were demonstrating ways that folks are working strategically, even though they're not being funded by a FIP. And so the FIP program isn't the only way for high priority ecological work to be occurring. It's one pathway, but it's not the pathway for everyone. So I wanted to remind that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Anybody else? Then Audrey, the floor is yours to talk about FIP progress tracking reports.
All right, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Eric Williams, is that a reasonable view?
It's a reasonable view. Of course, the text is really tiny, but I don't think you're intending us to be able to read it.
I am, thank you. I am going to drop in the chat a link and also note for folks that the link I'm putting in the chat is the same link that is showing up on the slide here. And that is to say just that all previously published reports are available on OWEB's website. So correct, there is no need to read the small text in these examples. So thank you. So progress tracking reports. I'm just going to jump right in and give a quick overview of the information that is in the progress tracking reports. And I think through this, you'll see kind of why the reports are provided, when they are, and then staff have a question for the board to discuss in about 9 minutes as we talk through this. So progress tracking reports are a suite of reports throughout the life of each of the FIP initiatives. So thinking back to Jillian's spreadsheet, there are many of these and they're published on the OWEB website. Currently, these reports are prepared every 2 years, and that's in time for the January board meetings in the odd numbered years, because that coincides with an opportunity for the partners to update the board on their FIP work. And this slide shows kind of a suite of those reports for the first cohort over on the left side, these reports were produced around 2017 or so. And then a suite of the reports for the second cohort that were produced around 2023 in the middle of their initiative, just so you get a sense of what they look like in that suite of reports. And they are developed collaboratively, with OWEB providing a template and guidance on what content to include, and OWEB providing formatting to produce consistent reports. So PTRs build on several important common foundational elements. That is the information provided in the FIP initiative applications, including those strategic action plans, a theory of change for each ecological priority, and a progress monitoring framework that is focused on a subset of outputs and outcomes selected from the theory of change. And then the actions that the FIP is implementing on the ground. And so thinking about that collaborative process. So partners kind of provide content and review their reports prior to their being made available to share with the board and other partners around that January meeting. So what we're going to do next is take a few minutes to walk through and show you an example of each of the type of information that is provided with each of the reports. And so first of all, we'll take a look at funding information that's provided by the OWEB grant types. And then we'll look at how accomplishments are highlighted through progress bubbles, and then how progress is tracked over time through progress bars. And we'll also show you that for each of these reports, there's an opportunity for the partnership to describe their larger approach to monitoring. And then there's some in-depth information about adaptive management that the FIP is doing over time. So this example of the OWEB funding is from the Clackamas draft progress tracking report that's currently being worked on. This is the only example we'll show that comes from one of the in-progress FIPs, one of the in-progress reports that we're working on to make available in January. And the reason we're showing an example from one of the in-progress ones is because staff are adding more detail on the funding with this next suite of reports. And we wanted to be able to pick one to show you as an example of what that looks like. So this is showing that OWEB funding by the OWEB grant types. So engagement, partnership technical assistance, monitoring, and restoration. And then it's also showing you that funding information by the category. And so to explain what that means in blue is kind of what was in that FIP initiative application, what was envisioned at time of application as far as what amount of funding would be needed for the different categories. And then the orange is showing what is currently, we're saying obligated in grant agreement. So currently been through that technical review process and in progress for an actual project. And then the smaller bars for each of the types of funding shown in gray are showing kind of, if you will, actuals or the amount that's been paid out to date. And so one example kind of takeaway you could get from this graph is that perhaps more funds were used for monitoring than was originally anticipated at the time of application. So that's just one type of kind of takeaway that you could make from the information here. In addition to the OWEB funding, each of the reports is showing the total estimated leverage funds. That information is sourced from the initiative applications. That information is not updated with each PTR. It is not really fully available to get updated information until projects are fully completed. And typically that is after that kind of final biennium of a FIP. So if you're thinking about the next section or the next type of information shown on each of the reports, I'm going to say that this is progress bubbles. So how the different strategies and actions connect to near-term and longer-term goals and objectives. It's kind of the overall intent of the layout of the page. But then focusing in a little bit on the bubbles, this is a place to highlight not only key restoration actions and accomplishments, but also monitoring and engagement accomplishments or milestones completed at the time of publication. And so just a quick example, one mapping assessment of perennial streams was completed. 9,000 newsletters were distributed. And so these progress bubbles, the types of accomplishments that are shown here, are not necessarily reported throughout the life of the initiative. They're not necessarily the same from one partnership's report to the next report. However, next, we'll take a quick look at some progress bars. And this is where the selected strategies that are tracked throughout the life of the FIP initiative are shown. And these strategies, so annual grass treatment, noxious weed treatment, acres seeded, these strategies connect to that progress monitoring framework. And so progress in these strategies should connect to that larger theory of change developed for the ecological priority in theory. For each strategy shown, there's a progress bar that's published with each of these reports. And then for each of these strategies, there is a target or objective that is specifically for the FIP initiative, determined by the FIP partnership. And in discussion with OWEB staff, kind of around the time of development of this first report. And then these progress bars, or the information towards these strategies, is consistently reported throughout time. And so these examples from the Baker Sage Grouse local implementation team show some progress that was achieved through grants, through OWEB grants, of course. And then additionally, just to point out, the partnership indicated some relevant progress on similar activities came through in-kind contributions, and really wanted to be able to show that in their report as well. Taking a look at another example of progress bars, and this one also shows the monitoring approach kind of call out text box. This is from the Rogue Forest Restoration Initiative and shows a couple of different related strategies: ecological thinning and then fuels reduction. And it actually has them shown by project area, and then describes kind of how a collaborative approach through the partnership helped to leverage significant funding to add a completely new project area. Again, this was something that was important for the partners to be able to tell their story through their report. For each of the FIP progress tracking reports, there is an opportunity to include a description of their approach to monitoring. Often that monitoring call-out box is really focused on longer term or larger scale monitoring than what can be described at kind of a biennial level. And so the last kind of type of information that we want you to be aware of that's coming in these reports, the example comes from one of the first FIPs, which was the Deschutes. And so this is what we're calling an adaptive management table, and it is a place for the partnership to really describe what challenges or opportunities did you experience over this last biennium? What did you learn? What were the lessons learned? And then what adaptations were made as a result of that? And so thinking about an audience of other practitioners that may be working in similar landscapes, or put another way, what do you wish you would have known a couple of years ago when you were planning this restoration work? And this is something that OWEB has heard is helpful for partners to understand these lessons learned. And sometimes it is difficult to find this information. So the adaptive management table has kind of lessons learned and adaptations made for restoration, and then follows a similar format to look at challenges and lessons learned related to funding and related to planning. So just to talk through this example briefly, with the funding, there was a need to kind of increase the resources available to increase the pace of change to benefit the desired outcomes for the FIP, and then around planning, their section is an opportunity to note needs to update their strategic action plan that happened throughout this iteration of the FIP. And then for those that have partnership capacity funding, there's an opportunity to highlight shifts that may have happened throughout the FIP, such as, shifting more funding, there's an opportunity to highlight lessons learned related to the partnership capacity funding. And then overall, throughout this table, this is really a place to talk about shifts that may have happened throughout the FIP, adaptations that were made because of the pandemic, for example, or to shift funding to monitoring or engagement work. And so just a quick recap, one of these PTRs is done for each partnership every 2 years throughout the life of the FIP. And then partners can refer to these as they give their updates to the board. So coming up this next January, 10 will be published. And the cohort 3 FIPs, of which I believe there are 5, will provide their presentations to the board. And today we're really interested in hearing what would be helpful for you to hear from those cohort 3 FIPs to help the board make funding decisions for that next biennium. And then just a couple other things to note, this next suite of reports is going to focus on completed projects, and that is a change compared with the past. And so progress bars, those bars we showed kind of on that 3rd page of most of these reports, the progress bars will go down for those final reports that are coming in from the cohort 2 FIPs, the ones that have previously published progress tracking reports. So just something to be aware of. Coming up in April, staff are considering a request to make funding available for additional post-FIP reporting. That could potentially be something like a PTR produced later on when funds are spent, perhaps when there's more information on the outputs and the actual leverage fund information is known. So thank you for the time to step through the information that is tracked in these PTRs. I'll hand it back to Eric.
Thanks, Audrey. As Audrey closed out with there, one of the key pieces that we wanted you to take away from this is that cohort 3 of FIPS, they have one more biennium to go. While the board expressed intent to fund 3 bienniums worth of funding as they do for every FIP, each biennium is still contingent upon the board deciding whether to continue funding that FIP. And so what we would like you to focus on when those FIP partnerships present to you is, are you satisfied with progress to date? Are you confident that progress will continue with another biennium of investment? And so that's really one of the main purposes of these presentations that the full board will see in January. You will get written reports from the cohort 2 FIPs that contains the information from what will be their final progress tracking report. We are talking internally about having that cohort of FIPs present at a future board meeting to help inform our ongoing discussions about post-FIP reporting. What does that look like? How can the board continue to assess the impact of the FIP program over the longer term? And so you will hear from those cohort 2 FIPs, but not at the January board meeting. We just recognize that board agenda time is tight, and fitting 5 presentations in is a pretty big lift. And we didn't want to double that with 10 presentations where you really only have a funding decision to make on half of those. So just wanted to make sure that that was clear to the committee and to the board when we get to that agenda item in January. So thank you.
Thank you, Eric and Audrey. Questions, Mark?
Yes, thank you. I as I was listening to this, I was thinking there might be, and you might have already thought about this, Sarah, but there's probably an audience besides the grants committee and the OWEB board for this, and that is the legislature. These tracking reports are hugely valuable when somebody's, looking to say, well, how effective has OWEB been? And these tracking reports, you're going to put them in a concise manner for a legislative report when you're presenting the budget or information session or whatever. But you know, it's when you see how many acres have been accomplished with, you know, reseeding or getting rid of weeds or, you know, habitat improvement projects. It's hugely powerful to a legislator that's looking at OWEB and saying, you know, how effective has this body been? And then maybe even having potentially some of the applicants testifying and saying how effective it's been. So just thinking kind of a big picture here about these tracking reports and how valuable they are to provide actual factual information to people who make policy and legislative and economic decisions affecting OWEB. Stop.
Good points, Mark. Stephanie and then Russ.
That's a great point, Mark. And I want to put in a plug for another report that we do every 2 years that several of the folks on this meeting are an important part of, and that is the Oregon Plan Biennial Report. So that's a really nice biennial rolled up summary of the work, all of the work that OWEB has funded, as well as what partner agencies have accomplished. We create county by county fact sheets about what's been funded. And it's something we've been talking about how to get more mileage out of. So maybe we can have an offline conversation about any ideas to share that. So I know we attach it in board packets, but we've been noodling about how can we highlight some of that work at that great rolled up level even more than we do now.
Russ?
So getting back to the initial comments on this whole FIP discussion here, we had in 2020 a light touch on the ecological priorities. What have we learned over the last 5 years? How do we, as a board, scientifically frame the ecological priorities that we will have in front of us moving forward, and where do we get the information to ground ourselves to know that we have the most advanced information to make those decisions about what those ecological priorities are. Independent of reports coming in, which agencies will provide us the background material essential to be able to make sure we are making the appropriate investments based upon the pressures that are hitting the environment, and where's the information going to come from? Clearly ODFW will play a major role, but I'm not clear what the Chris from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, Forest Service, ODF, what is ODF going to be providing? There's so many different agencies that have expertise. I'm uncomfortable at this point with a reliance on a light touch in the past with the biological pressures that we are seeing moving forward. And I just want to get perspective from this group.
Yeah, thanks, Russ. The light touch that was referenced was because the program was so new. And when we did the priorities the first time in 2014-15, it was a fairly extensive touch, which is what Eric presented is our approach this time around, with a lot more engagement. And so that was the rationale for 2020. The program was simply too new. Our first cohort was just underway. There were people maybe considering entering the program. We didn't want to ricochet them too quickly with different priorities. But that in the outline that Eric presented early on, it was just one item on there, but it was like a 3 or 4 month period that included extensive engagement with both agencies and grantee partners as well, to try to obtain that information. And, we had an example of someone who probably could help inform this join the meeting today, someone from USGS. They have a lot of scientific information that could help inform this process. And that is part of the plan, is to engage as many of those agencies as we can, recognizing still that, that's the background and basis for you then to take and figure out, okay, here's what we want to pull out of that as our board designated priorities. Eric, do you have anything to add to that in terms of agency engagement?
No, I think you covered it, Eric. I do want to also acknowledge that we also really want to hear from our partners outside of agency land, because they will have a lot of feedback on, one, the existing priorities and how that has or perhaps has not suited them, and any additional or revised priorities, and then sort of balancing that with what we're hearing from agencies as well. So it's we have our work cut out for us, I think, in the next year, because I think, Russ, you've identified there's a lot at stake here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Russ. Jillian?
Yeah, thanks. This is circling back to the progress tracking report conversation and a question that Audrey posed. So OWEB staff will be working with the 5 cohort 3 FIPS to help them prepare for their presentation to the board in January. And so Audrey walked through the elements of the progress tracking reports that you'll be able to review prior to that. But we're curious to know if there's any other information that would be really useful to hear from each of the FIPS in January for you to be able to, to consider future funding for them. So now would be a great time if there are certain things you all would like for them to talk about, and we can give them that feedback.
All right. Liz, do you have one? You got to come off mute.
Sorry about that, Dan. Russ just gave me a thought about how we engage the broader non-voting members. And I just think this was a nice way, this would be a good way in what he mentioned to maybe tee up this conversation and ready some of our other board members specifically about this. I think it's an easy way to do, and I sort of crave that. How do we get very specific information from our many board members involved in this? So thanks, Russ, for reminding me about that.
Liz, I was thinking along the same lines, and I think we have a little non-voting members, ex officio members cohort that will be meeting in January, and maybe we can start putting our heads together informally and start chatting about good process connections there. Well, I got the mic. I wanted to flag too, Russ, and everybody. This is something I can bring up at Natural Resources Cabinet with other directors and with governor's natural resource agencies, just so directors know that this effort is coming and that we'll be connecting with their staff. And we're also part of just a lot of different cross-agency initiatives within state natural resources right now that our federal partners are also engaged in. So Steph and Renee and I spent the afternoon yesterday at a ODF and U.S. Forest Service convened landscape resiliency collaborative effort. It has acronyms that I can never remember. But I think just, we have so many more of those touch points, I think, than it ever probably looks like to anybody else, and more of them all the time. And this is a governor's natural resource office that is really prioritizing interagency collaboration, both among state and federal partners. So it's a good reminder to be sort of seeding that now so that we're ready and folks are aware before we get to the conversations that are more formal in Eric's work plan.
Thank you, Sarah. I just keep on thinking about the cabinet level that is so unique to this board, and how do we just up our game on it? So thank you all for thinking, and just kudos for the progress report. I like the way it's presented.
All right, we do need to give Audrey some input here, folks. So let's rise to the challenge. They're asking us to help guide the people who are going to be talking to us in January. Audrey, one thing I would be very interested in hearing about is you know, these lessons learned, the adaptive management, how are these lessons being shared with a broader community of restoration practitioners so that so that a more broad group of people can learn these lessons, right? Rather than kind of being, you know, as you say, hard to find, how are they more broadly shared to increase the effectiveness across the whole state of all restoration providers? I'm sure Mark has something to offer too. I gotta call on people if they don't say something. Mark and then Chris.
Well, I was just, as you were talking, I was agreeing. Yeah, I was thinking, yeah, you know, you've heard me say this before, but life's too short not to steal good ideas from other people. It's the same thing with lessons learned. You know, if one of the FIPS has a lessons learned and they put that in their progress report and it applies to other, you know, FIPS around, oh, you need to think about this. And they go, oh, shoot, yeah, we should have done that. So, yeah, that's hugely powerful as part of that progress report is lessons learned. And then what did you do about that lesson learned? So, or what would you recommend to somebody else that's going to be doing that and you made a mistake, or you know there's an option to say, oh well, maybe we'll do it a little different next time, so that next group would look at it and go, huh, never thought about that.
All right, Lindsay.
Thank you. I know matches captured. You know, like I really liked the little call out for some of the NRCS funds that showed additional work being done. But I guess I would like to know, looking forward beyond the FIP, where do they see the partnership going? And in that sense, one, do they anticipate applying for another FIP in the future? And then two, sort of where are they going with the partnership in terms of additional funding? Like who else, you know, once their FIP ends, where else are they kind of looking at now or into the future kind of plan to apply to?
I'd be curious too, are they happy? Like, I mean, sure, they got, you know, 9,000 brochures done and they've restored X number of miles. Is it sort of achieving the outcomes that they were hoping to achieve? Or is it telling them that, you know, maybe we gotta do something different? Hopefully it is. What do you think, Russ?
I'd like to know whether they feel that the FIP priority should continue or not, and why.
Audrey, is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the feedback, and thanks for checking in. Yes, and I wanted to go back to the comment of the first kind of, you know, how are the information, how are the reports shared, or how's the information shared with practitioners? I hear two things in that, and one thing I'd love to kind of confirm. One is around maybe the audience of the reports being, you know, what can we learn a little bit more about that? And then secondly, I did want to take a quick moment and say that although this was covered on a slide that was shown, all of those reports are published on the OWEB webpage, and that link to where all those reports are is going to be in online along with the YouTube link to this recording, just for folks that may be watching the presentation and that slide went by quickly. And I just wanted to make the point that currently the main place the reports are is housed on the OWEB webpage. And yes, I hear interest in kind of learning more about the audience and how to share them more broadly. And the other feedback is helpful, but I would also turn to the other FIP coordinators to see, because FIP coordinators are helping the partnerships shape those presentations coming up in January. So Jillian, Eric, Denise, and Eric, other things that you would like to hear at the January presentation?
I think this is real helpful feedback. I think we're in pretty good shape on what we can be requesting from the information from the cohort 3 FIPS. So present to the board in January. Thanks.
All right. Well, that brings us to our last agenda item, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who have a lot of other business to say, but I know that Sarah in particular wanted to take a couple minutes, and that's all we have. So I'm going to defer to Sarah for a little budget.
Okay, I should acknowledge, got a note from Mark Labhart reminding me that it feels like a million years ago to me now, but Monday, the governor's recommended budget came out, and I owe you guys an email on that. I did put together an email overview to staff that I'm just gonna kind of high grade a little bit, and I'll get out to the full board. If not later today, then certainly before the end of the week. I will share with folks in our last 30 seconds here, maybe, that Christmas came early to OWEB this year in the form of the governor's request budget. I think part of that was, an improved revenue forecast where all of our agencies were preparing for significant cuts. Revenue forecast came in a little stronger. The governor is describing this as her stability budget. She's going to hold firm on her priorities, but the increase in funding has created a little space for those of us who are not primarily focused on housing and the other sort of top three gubernatorial priorities. And the natural resources agencies in general, I think, were made remarkably whole in the governor's request budget, especially compared with what we were initially preparing for. So you'll remember OWEB faced the challenge of having a large number of limited duration appointments or positions that we were not allowed to work into our agency request budget formally. Our partners at DAS Chief Financial Office and Governor's Natural Resource Office really heard our concerns, and I think concerns from partners around that. And we got pretty much very close to everything we asked for in our agency request budget, as well as renewal of a number of limited duration positions associated with some of our legislatively mandated project. We even have in GRB some new grant funding for Oregon Ag Heritage Program and the Natural and Working Lands Climate Fund proposed, which was truly unexpected. And so that is good news for us, for OWEB's mission and programs, and I think just really signifies the value add that OWEB has been providing, not just through our kind of core historical lottery funded programs, but being responsive to legislative and executive branch priorities over the last couple biennia, and really standing up good programs quickly and getting dollars on the ground in a way that shows the results that Audrey was talking about here today. So I'll share some other highlights, but just wanted folks to know that it's a pretty darn good news story for us. Appreciate the support of board staff and our partners throughout state government, because it was we had some folks helping us keep whole this time, and really appreciate that. So that said, now we wait and see what the legislature does. A reminder that OWEB staff is in a position where we support the governor's budget, and that's what we'll do going forward. We're all part of the enterprise team here. If board members wish to engage in legislative advocacy in the coming year, you can do that, as I understand it, but you should go in and introduce yourself and your role and make it clear that you're representing yourself and not speaking as an OWEB board member. So we'll have some reminders around that in January, but those are kind of the rules of the road, and we have a lot to celebrate.
Woohoo! All right.
Wanted to help you end the meeting on a strong note there, Dan.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah.
And I think we will end. Nicole, do we have to do anything except say goodbye?
Dan doesn't have the gavel? There must be a virtual gavel.
I have a rubber mallet.
Happy holidays, everyone.